Over the Kuban Peninsula, on a sweltering July 1943 afternoon, Ivan Kozhedub of the 241st Fighter Aviation Regiment spotted a Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber at 3,000 meters. His Lay-5's twin, SSVAK 20mm cannons, 170 rounds, Lay-5's twin Schwack 20mm cannons, 170 rounds per gun, tore through the German aircraft in a short burst. The kill marked Kozhedub's first victory on July 6th. But for Luftwaffe pilots accustomed to outrunning Soviet fighters, the encounter revealed a disturbing reality. A wooden Soviet aircraft now matched their speed. At 3,000 meters, the Lavochkin reached 580 kilometers per hour, climbing at 16.7 meters per second with a sustained turn time of 19 seconds per full circle at low altitude. Powered by the Shvetsov AES-82 14-cylinder air-cooled radial engine producing 1,700 horsepower, this 2,600-kilogram fighter arrived without the glycol cooling lines that made earlier Soviet aircraft bleed to death from single bullet strikes. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, weapons, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. 2 years earlier, no such aircraft existed. At 3 o'clock on June 22, 1941, Luftwaffe bombers found approximately 800 Soviet aircraft destroyed on the ground, sitting in rows without dispersal or camouflage nets along border airfields. By 4:30, surviving MiG-16 Type 24 fighters scrambled from forward bases, their open cockpits exposing pilots to -40-degree winds as they climbed toward Bf-109F interceptors. The German fighters flew 100 kilometers per hour faster, 562 versus 462, and climbed at nearly twice the rate. Soviet pilots called their mounts the lacquered guaranteed coffin. Mid-1941 brought the LAGG-3 into service from Soviet factories. Its M105 inline engine producing 1,050 horsepower through a heavy airframe design that preserved the coffin reputation with a different acronym. At Gorky in early 1942, Lavochkin's design bureau removed the M105 entirely, widening the fuselage nose to accommodate the ASH-82 radial. The first prototype completed initial flight tests in March 1942 from Gorky Airfield, its wooden fuselage of pine, birch, and delta wood carrying the wider engine cowling. By mid-1942, production began at Factory 21. Approximately 1,100 aircraft rolled from assembly lines by late 1942, deploying to Eastern Front bases with a 9.8-meter wingspan and 765-kilometer range. In early 1943, Kozhedub received his assignment to the 241st Regiment, learning the LA-5's 138-kilometer-per-hour landing speed at the training base. The ASH-82 started reliably at -40 degrees Celsius, critical for forward airfields where winter mornings froze hydraulic fluids solid. At dawn, bombs fell on parked fighters, arrayed in neat rows. Explosions tore through fuselages. Aviation fuel ignited in orange fireballs that consumed canvas and wood. Metal twisted under concussive force. Roughly 1,200 Soviet aircraft lay destroyed by day's end, 800 of them obliterated before pilots reached cockpits. No dispersal patterns had scattered the targets. No camouflage nets concealed them from Luftwaffe bombardiers, who found airfields along the border exposed to methodical destruction. Surviving aviators scrambled into stubby fighters with exposed seats, the open cockpit relics climbing at rates inferior by nearly 2-to-1 compared to enemy interceptors. German aircraft held 100-kilometer-per-hour speed advantages, turning engagements into pursuit rather than combat. The mathematics of catastrophe extended beyond one morning. By year's end, 21,000 Soviet aircraft had been lost, a figure representing entire air armies consumed in 6 months. Pilot training averaged under 50 hours, barely sufficient for takeoff and landing sequences. inadequate for deflection shooting or energy management in vertical maneuvers. Factory production lines delivered wooden fighters bearing designations that pilots translated as dark humor. Lacquered guaranteed coffin became the unofficial name for inline-engined interceptors emerging from assembly halls. Glycol coolant circulated through vulnerable plumbing that enemy fire could rupture with single rounds, transforming engines into seizing metal blocks within seconds. Design bureaus recognized the failures. Lavochkin's team at production facilities along the Volga removed inline engines entirely, widening fuselage noses to accommodate radial power plants, generating 1,700 horses from 14 air-cooled cylinders. First prototypes completed flight testing in spring 1942, demonstrating 531 km/h velocities at sea level. By summer, assembly lines produced wooden interceptors combining reliable cold weather, starting with ammunition loads of 200 rounds per cannon. Armament sufficient for brief engagements, but limiting sustained combat. The redesigned fighter climbed to 5,000 meters in 5.7 minutes, performance that finally matched enemy capabilities rather than conceding altitude and speed before merge. Service ceilings extended to 11,000 meters. One pilot assigned to the 241st Fighter Aviation Regiment received training on the type at forward bases where temperatures still plunged low enough to freeze hydraulic systems. By early 1942, Semyon Lavochkin's design bureau teetered on the edge of liquidation. Stalin's Aviation Commissariat issued an ultimatum: fix the aircraft or face closure. The deadline? 6 weeks. Engineers worked through February nights in unheated workshops, redesigning the entire forward fuselage to accommodate the radial's bulk. Material shortages imposed their own constraints. Aluminum remained reserved for bomber production, forcing Lavochkin to construct the airframe from pine and birch plywood, wood that could be sourced from forests surrounding Moscow's industrial ring. The fuselage took shape as laminated sections bonded with phenolic resin, structurally sound but aesthetically crude compared to the sleek Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs it would face. In March 1942, test pilot Alexei Nikashin lifted the prototype off a snow-dusted runway for its first flight. The aircraft that emerged from this forced metamorphosis carried the designation La-5. On paper, it's still lost. German technical intelligence would later note the La-5's maximum speed of 583 km/h at sea level. Respectable, but not remarkable. Armament consisted of two 20mm HVAK cannons with 200 rounds per gun, adequate but hardly overwhelming. Yet the specifications missed what mattered. The Eastern Front wasn't fought at 8,000 meters where thin air favored sleek inline engines. Soviet pilots engaged German formations between ground level and 5,000 meters, altitudes where the ASH-82's torque and the La-5's rugged construction delivered performance that finally matched the FW-190. In the howling low-altitude furball over Stalingrad's ruins and the Kuban steppe, the La-5 could turn inside. Its opponent absorb punishment, its wooden frame distributed across multiple bulkheads, and keep flying when a single glycol line rupture would have doomed its predecessor. Production lines began tooling in mid-1942. By summer, the first operational La-5s reached frontline regiments. Engineers at Factory No. 21 addressed the operational fighter's most dangerous limitation in May 1943. The HH-82FN engine variant, delivering 1,850 horsepower through direct fuel injection, eliminated the negative G cutout that had killed pilots during inverted dives. Test flights at altitude demonstrated the improvement. Maximum speed reached 648 km/h at 6,250 meters, a measurable gain over earlier production models. The LA-5FN designation marked this fuel system transformation, not a new airframe. At dawn on July 5, 1943, the Kursk offensive began with massed aerial support. The 2nd and 16th Air Armies launched over 2,000 sorties. Lavochkin's wood frame interceptors targeting German bomber formations across the salient. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Kozhedub of the 245th Fighter Aviation Regiment dove on a Focke-Wulf at 5,000 meters over the Kuban Peninsula that same month, firing a 2-second burst. He pulled up at 3,000 meters above the Black Sea coast, checking his mirrors, his third kill of the month. By December 1943, prototype evaluators at LII base tested a more radical evolution. The La-7 incorporated metal spars fabricated from Lend-Lease aluminum, replacing wooden wing structures entirely. This change reduced weight and increased strength, enabling top speeds of 684 kilometers per hour at 6,150 meters. The aircraft measured 8.6 meters in length, maintaining the original fuselage's basic geometry. Production began in early 1944 with aluminum spars throughout the wing structure spanning 17.59 square meters of area. Armament increased to 3 Berezin B-20 20mm cannons with 130 rounds per gun, concentrating firepower in the nose. Test aircraft number 452-101-39 recorded maximum speeds across altitude bands: 613 km per hour at sea level, 660 km per hour at 6,000 meters. Climb performance improved dramatically, 4.3 minutes to 5,000 meters using war emergency power. The service ceiling reached 10,450 meters with a rate of climb measuring 15.7 meters per second. A fully laden aircraft required 340 meters for takeoff. The equation had reversed. At 5,000 meters, the LA-7 achieved 661 kilometers per hour against the Bf-109 G6's 623 kilometers per hour. Production of La-5 and La-7 variants combined reached 15,700 aircraft by war's end, approximately 5,753 of them the refined La-7 model. Kozhedub transitioned to the type in 1944, continuing operations over the Eastern Front. The pine-bodied interceptor had evolved into an aluminum-spared fighter faster than its German opponents at every operational altitude. Ivan Kozhedub entered combat in March 1943, flying LA-5s from the 241st Fighter Aviation Regiment, beginning a 30-month accounting that would close at 62 confirmed kills. All in Lavochkin aircraft, never once shot down by German fighters. Over the Kuban that spring, ground control radar directed La-5 scrambles against Jagdgeschwader 52, pair tactics executed with Vedushchi Vedome discipline, while the VISH-105V propellers clawed through 19-second turns at low altitude. German losses exceeded 800 aircraft in 6 weeks. LA-5 replacements arrived monthly from Factory 21 Gorky, production tempo absorbing attrition that would have crippled metal airframe programs. At Kursk, the rotating mass formations appeared, fresh squadrons cycling through combat, while exhausted units withdrew to forward bases where AS-82 radials started reliably at -40 Celsius. No glycol lines to freeze. Kozhedub favored short attacks from below, opening fire at knife fight ranges to maximize impact from cannon strikes. By 1944, the La-5FN climbed at 20 to 24 meters per second. From sea level, propelling 3,168 kilograms of pine and birch fuselage through air at 259 kilometers per hour during the ascent. The La-7 that followed turned in 18.5 seconds to the right. Aileron deflection limited to 18 degrees. Wing loading reaching 188 kilograms per square meter on airfoils derived from NAC A23016 profiles. Sortie-to-loss ratios improved to 1/3 of 1941 I-16 levels during Bagration, as pilot training standardized and tactics matured. Over Berlin in May 1945, the mathematics became visible: 17,000 VVS aircraft versus hundreds defending the Reich. La-7 units providing air cover from bases within the type's 665-kilometer range. Kozhedub flew his final combat mission in April over the Oder, in an La-7 bearing a fallen comrade's name painted on the nose. the 3,360-kilogram fighter capable of wheels-up landings that pilots could burn after emergency touchdowns beyond German lines. In 1991, he died in a Moscow apartment, Marshal of Aviation rank, 3 Hero of the Soviet Union medals. That sweltering July afternoon over the Kuban 2 years earlier had announced the reversal, a wooden Soviet fighter that finally matched their speed. The verdict formed in production halls and frozen airstrips. Adequacy in performance plus overwhelming output plus acceptable sacrifice equaled exactly enough. The La-7 sat motionless on the tarmac after that final April sortie, engine ticking as metal cooled. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.